Um, Thanks very much. So I'm Barney Reynolds. I'm a financial regulatory specialist and global head of the practice at Shearman and Sterling. It's an American headquartered firm. We're merging next month with a UK headquartered firm, Allen & Overy. So it's going to be truly global. The third biggest law firm by footprint and the main financial institutions law firm, the two biggest being PE firms. I'm joined here by Adam Gagen, Global Head of Government Affairs at Revolut, Priya Guliani, CEO at EarthID, and Neelesh Pal, Global Head of Financial Services Strategy, amongst other things, at WNS. I'll ask them to give you a sentence on what actually these things do and what they do in a second. So what's the problem we're trying to solve on this, or at least illuminate on this panel? We operate a global financial center. We want to continue doing that. I presume everyone in this room would agree with that. That includes retail increasingly. It's not been a global market, retail to some degree in financial services hitherto. But with technology, it seems likely that it's going to be possible to run a global retail market. But a financial market depends, to be successful, on trust and legal certainty. And our legal method of reasoning involves crowdsourcing of thinking. It's not top-down, it's bottom-up. It's lots and lots of individual people making individual judgment calls and using their own argumentation, reasoning, and powers of persuasion to create a sort of bubble around themselves. And we have a system that facilitates that, luckily. The question, though, is how do we make this work for cyber fraud? Now, the UK also has a unique, we have a pretty unique legal system in the sense we haven't got a constitution, we haven't got judges involved, it's just us. But there's another problem, though, to solve in the UK using our collective brainpower, which is we have an aversion to IDs. What we're going to try and talk about, and that may be unusual in the UK, if not unique, so we're not willing to go down, or at least we're very reluctant to go down the imposition of requirements for IDs for people to use financial services. Now, the good thing is if we solve for this, it means that we're going to tap into a far bigger market than anyone else globally, because we're not requiring anything as it stands. But can we solve for it? So I'm going to turn to Adam, actually, because your business, Adam, perhaps you could tell us a bit more, is tackling this day to day, this whole issue of cyber fraud. Obviously, we just heard the stats. They're shooting up. Massive issue. We're all aware of it. I'm sure everyone in this room's been subject to it. Bit of a flavor of that, bit of a flavor of what you and Revolut are doing on that topic. And your ideas of a solution, which may be different from what I was just suggesting, of course.
Well, that was a very useful introduction. Thanks for setting the scene. Maybe just 30 seconds on Revolut. So hands up, who's heard of Revolut? Good, everyone's awake. Hands up, who's a Revolut customer? Nice check as well. Okay, still some work to do. As most of you know, Revolut's UK FinTech, one of the fastest growing globally. We're now at more than 40 million customers around the world. About 8 million of those are here in the UK. And when we look at this issue of fraud and financial crime, we look at it globally, and we see a very sophisticated environment that we need to essentially be investing a lot of money and time in combating. The big challenge that we face, and I think it's going to be the topic of conversation today, is that the UK is particularly a vulnerable market. We have about 22% of our customers here in the UK. We see around about 68% of the fraud attacks taking place in the UK. And that's a really odd statistic. Why is that happening is a big discussion amongst the industry, and what do we need to do to solve it? And that's why I think the panel discussion we're going to have today is really key, because if we in the UK can understand, put our hands around this problem, then I think that's going to lead to a successful model we could then potentially export to other markets. Also, though, we need to probably approach this with some humility and recognize maybe some other markets are doing things, whether it's on digital identity, whether it's on regulatory rules, whether it's on the industry, maybe a little bit better than we are as well. From our point of view, there's sort of three big things we really need to talk about. The first is, where are these scams and fraudsters actually being attacked from. And a lot of that we see is around online platforms and then also to some extent some vulnerabilities in the telecommunications sector. That doesn't mean that you can solve the problem by just getting those guys to take actions, but we do need to start addressing that, and that's a place we've been a bit weak on in the UK. Second is really then the industry, the financial industry. What are we doing to protect our customers? And again, we can talk to a lot of the interventions we take as Revolut. Part of that is transaction by transaction monitoring, assessment, and control. Part of that is very diligent and comprehensive onboarding. And then part of that is education, actually, trying to get to our customers before they're scammed, explain the risk, explain what they're going to see, and explain how they should behave. And then the third element that we probably will need to touch on as well is then what should the government, what should law enforcement be doing? And again, there, from an enforcement point of view, until we start going after these criminals, they're going to keep seeing potentially the UK as an easy market. In the UK, we have around about 40% of all crime linked to fraud, one way or another. Only about 1% of our policing resources are devoted to tackling it. Again, is that balance right? We would probably, as the industry, argue no, something more needs to be done. So that was just a very brief introduction. I'll hand back to you as some of the topics I think we'll get to later on.
Thanks. So I'm going to bring in Priya, who's got a business offering at the sort of center potentially of the solution. Just to frame it a little bit, though, there is a boiling the ocean element of this discussion, right? So we can't be the world's policeman. We haven't, even if we had the resource to start clamping down more on people in the UK, we couldn't do everyone else. Realistically. So is there a silver bullet, or is there a combination of things that's actually practicable and actionable that we can ask people to do that's a silver bullet? So Priya, tell us about your business.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Barney. And EarthID is a decentralized identity platform. What that means is we offer our customers with digital identity wallets, tamper-proof credentials, and privacy-preserving verifications. The whole of when we talk about fraud, I think we're at an intriguing place with both FinTech as well as fraud. FinTech is growing. Janine yesterday mentioned that 8 out of 10 adults in the UK are actually using one of the other FinTech tools every day. So that's the adoption is really high. The fraud is becoming more and more sophisticated. And crux of that is identity, because every fraud sort of starts with a synthetic identity or somebody trying to impersonate somebody else and then conducting the fraud by either creating a fake account for illicit transactions and so on and so forth. So identity verification plays a very crucial role in this space. And I feel that EarthID sits at a very good position here because we work with organizations to help them prevent identity frauds, comply with data privacy laws, but on the other hand, our value proposition is also about the users, where we empower users with data privacy, data ownership, and consent. So every transaction that you do, you ensure that there is a purposeful consent associated to it, and you basically are in charge of your data. When you like, you can revoke the access.
Thank you. Neelesh, just to bring you in, can you tell us a bit about what you're doing in the sector, whether you think a voluntary ID is a solution, and if not, what you think the solution is?
Yeah, thanks, Barney. And thanks, Adam and Priya. First, maybe introduction to WNS. So WNS is a global business process management company and working across global fintechs, financial institutions in combating areas around financial crime, fraud, and beyond. Talking about fraud, a lot of the sophistication which we spoke of earlier has been embedded into the system, and still fraudsters are coming up with newer ways and means of kind of frauds. WNS is basically primarily working extensively in the area of building more analytical solutions, AI-driven models, as well as actually putting an investigation layer on top of that. Now, what it fundamentally means is while the AI is doing its job of detecting a vulnerable transaction, it is also important for the human eye to look at some of these cases and identify what are the patterns associated, as well as to look at real-time prevention of some of these frauds as well. So that's fundamentally what we've been extensively doing. And from an identity perspective, there have been like some of the ideas which Priya spoke about. There's something which is being deployed across the globe. But also there are digital identities which governments globally are adopting, which are making the onboarding process seamless, the entire ongoing review process seamless. So that's something which we are seeing as a great adoption.
So, Adam, so this has got us to a sort of base level, I think, for this discussion now. So this is kind of, now we're nudging into the sort of difficult, the most difficult bits. So we got the voluntary ID sort of idea, which obviously is limited by people having to join it. And your answer presumably is more people should join, and I'm sure that's a good solution. But for those who don't, Adam, just to bring you back in, and you know, you touched on the idea, you had this idea that the regulators would do more. Obviously, that's limited. You want more enforcement. Obviously, there are limitations around that. And it may or may not involve money, of course, because if you're using AI, it might be quite cheap, and staffing. You know, can you nudge us into the realms of the practical that we can do here and now?
So the tough question, how do we fix the problem? So I think there's a couple of very practical things we can get right. And it's really important that we make the right decisions, because we talked about the great benefit FinTech brings, and financial inclusion is a key priority for both parties at the moment here in the UK. The question is, as you try and combat fraud, though, you're always putting friction in the system. You're putting friction when people try and get a bank account. You're putting friction when people are trying to make a transaction. And again, that's really good if that's stopping a fraudulent transaction, but it's very dangerous if it's stopping a legitimate transaction or someone just trying to sign up to actually get access to financial services or credit or whatever it is. So how do we get this balance right? So we think there's three things that probably need to take place. We as the financial industry already spend millions on this issue. When people are defrauded, we often reimburse them. That means we directly lose the money. But irrespective of that, you know, if there's a trust issue with an organization or financial services, that's bad for us. So we have a very big and direct incentive to try and solve this problem. At the moment, a number of online platforms where a lot of these scams are originating don't. Some of them, they get paid for advertisements for a scam. We then essentially have our customers scammed, and we then have to try and protect them from that. But that actual online platform has potentially made money from that transaction. There's a lot of good work being done in the UK, things like the Online Safety Act you may have heard of. There's some new codes coming from Ofcom. It's going to require these big providers to do more and do better. But in places like Europe, they're just very clearly giving a financial incentive. They're saying if someone sees a Facebook ad by Martin Lewis saying, buy this crypto coin, it's really good for you, and that turns out to be a scam, the Facebook ad should therefore be essentially creating a liability on Facebook to refund that customer, or at least partially refund them. And that's what they're doing in Europe and some other jurisdictions. I think we should do it here too. It would radically change the environment you see online, all of these fake ads. Second quick thing is probably being very clear what banks and financial organizations need to do, and then what customers need to do. So there's a new regime coming in October called mandatory reimbursement. As they say, the name is kind of like what it says on the tin. Basically, it means that for virtually every time someone in the UK makes a transfer, if they're scammed, they're going to get their money back from their bank. There's a couple of very loose parameters why that wouldn't be the case. As a country, we probably need to have a discussion whether that's exactly the right balance. Should, for example, customers have to tell the truth when their bank asks them, have you opened an account recently? Has someone from Revolut called you? Because if they say yes to either of those questions, we know that's a pretty high-risk transaction. We're going to stop it, slow it down. And so there's some balance I think we probably need to bring in over the next few months, very short term, to make sure everyone knows their role, everyone has their responsibility. And at the moment, I think historically we've really put it all on the banks. Banks keep having to be incentivized to do more, but I think we all need to try and solve this problem collectively.
So just Neelesh, because I know you have a sort of international overview of some of the things that people are doing in India and the Middle East and so on. I mean, in the common law environment that we operate in, we do have liability for people who make misrepresentations. We do have people who are liable for deceit. We do, and so we have a lot of these remedies, and the courts provide that. And we have a general system which works on the basis of everyone being truthful in their statements. Is this enough, Neelesh, or what other things are you seeing around the world?
I would say what we are seeing across the world is things around preventing the fraud more than resolving it futuristic. And by prevention, I mean adoption of multi-factor authentication in a big way. Basically, for every transaction, there is a one-time password which gets generated. It is at times irritating, but it is important to prevent a fraud, for a lack of a better term. The second way of looking at it is also having digital identities being introduced, like we've seen governments doing that extensively. If I talk about India in particular, India has done a fantastic job of actually implementing digital IDs across the globe, and that is being adopted by various other governments even across the globe as well. So that is something which has helped kind of customers being prevented from the fraud, which are more identity frauds. But there are different categories which spring up. On the payment side as well, that is something as a fraud area. That's where we are seeing a lot of the one-time password or things around multi-factor being introduced, which has helped prevent payment frauds. That's another big area where financial institutions are grappling with as well.
So Priya, just coming back, because your system's actually working, right? So all of this other stuff, it's very interesting, and there are things working around the world, but your one actually is working in the center of it. Is there a way to leverage that, your solution, and not just with your business, no doubt you've got competitors, but to get into the thick of this and to solve the problem just through your existence, I suppose? Do you need anything more to make this work?
Sure. No, I think it's a self-sufficient solution, but I think what helps is putting frameworks in practice. And to quote that, I would like to give an example from European Union. So EU launched their EIDAS 2.0 and mass approved the use of digital identity wallets last month. What that means is they're providing a framework for identity verifications and any digital transactions that happened around electronic identity. And that basically puts a framework around which helps combat fraud at a maximum extent. What it's saying is that there would be certain approved wallet providers who would be able to take forth the transactions, and the individual citizens can then decide which wallet I want to work with. And that basically takes off the pressure from the government. I think that's what we're all looking to hear as well, but then also enables that there are certain set providers which have been approved that are providing that service. And in that play, I think since that has happened, EarthID has seen a very positive steer with respect to traction. Yeah.
But does a business wanting to do business have to use an approved wallet provider, or can they just decide to take anyone they want?
They can take anyone they want.
So it doesn't do more than provide an imprimatur to a business already out there?
So what the framework would provide is certain standards. For example, that there should be interoperability of data, that if I want to switch from one wallet provider to another, then I can still take my data with me. And same for when I want to move from one bank to another. So it just creates that pathway for you to...
I mean, just on that, I have an idea, which is that we should have property entitlements for our own data. We should be able to move it around anyway. But, you know, now, we're running out of time because we're coming out to the end of this, and I shall give you each one. Is there any... I thought I heard a burning question from the audience. No? So can I give you a wrap-up solution, chance to give a wrap-up solution? Priya, what's your solution?
I think identity play is really important for me. Giving users the control of data ownership, privacy, and consent is vital to thrive in a digital economy, and that's what I would go with.
Thank you. Neelesh.
Yeah, beyond, I think, the digital ID, I would also, on the payment side, which is also a big area, I would say multi-factor authentication should become the norm across, and that would actually prevent a lot of frauds, which we are looking at the payment front.
I can't, sorry, I should have raised it before, but multi-factor is a real pain, isn't it? I mean, is there any, do you have a solution to that?
No, so multi-factor is a pain, but it is actually it works. That's the only way it works to prevent the fraud, so it's still bad.
Fair enough, okay. Adam.
So just two recommendations. I think one, make sure everyone has a financial incentive to stop fraud, and that's particularly on big tech and telcos. I think secondly, it's understanding that these are very sophisticated organized crime actors, and therefore we need to come up with some really simple steps to make sure everyone in the UK understands. For example, always tell the truth to your bank, never share your one-time passcode. And even if just every single person in the UK did those two things, we would see a big reduction in the fraud in the UK.
And Adam, just on that, so liability. You mentioned before that there's this whole UK proposal to introduce more liability. How do you see that working? Because that's a topic just to tease people with as a final.
So there's a lot of debate in the industry in this, quite high-strung. I think the objective of the regulator has been really positive. I think there's a big concern in the wider industry of implementation being very difficult and very challenging. And again, it comes back to what are we trying to achieve? Are we simply trying to make sure everyone gets their money back? Or are we trying to stop fraud in the first place? And we think probably there needs to be slightly greater emphasis on stopping the fraud in the first place. Because just because you get your money back, the emotional pain, the concern, the structure, I've been defrauded, other people have, it's not enough in the UK for us just to make you whole. We need to stop it in the first place.
Priya, I saw you.
I just wanted to make one statement around that. It's about responsibility and liability. So while fintechs have the responsibility because of the wider adoption to combat fraud, I think it's about the liability. So Adam, what mentioned before about the authorized push payment frauds, right? So I don't want to take the whole liability while I know that 70% of the frauds are actually happening on the social media platforms. So that shared liability is really important in order to, we as a community collectively combat fraud.
It all depends on the facts, who's responsible for the loss, right? And you need very subtle thinking to penetrate the answer to that and make sure it's a fair allocation of risk. Good. Well, thank you for indulging us. I hope that was useful. It certainly was very interesting to me. Thank you all to the panel.